The blood trail didn't lead to a deer or a stray dog. It led straight to the utility sink at the back of my scrapyard. I have spent 20 years stripping stolen luxury cars and melting down engine blocks for the organization, so I know the difference between transmission fluid and arterial spray. When I followed those dark red drops around the stack of rusted shipping containers, my hand went instinctively to the .38 tucked in my waistband. I expected a junkie or a thief. What I found made me freeze. A young soldier, a made man from the rival Southern Syndicate, was crumpled against the corrugated metal wall. He was pressing a silk handkerchief against a hole in his side, his other hand reaching weakly toward the slop sink we used to wash grease off parts. His breathing was wet and jagged, the sound of a lung filling up. His eyes locked onto mine with the feral intensity of a man who expects the next sound he hears to be a gunshot. In our line of work, finding a rival soldier on your turf means one thing: war. If the boss found out I had a Southern operative bleeding out next to my crusher, I would be buried in the foundation of the new casino by morning. The standing order was simple: put 2 in the head, wrap the body in chain link fence, and drop it in the bay. I raised my pistol. My finger hovered over the trigger. It was the smart play. It was the safe play. It was what kept you alive in this city. But something in the kid's eyes stopped me. It wasn't just pain. It was a desperate animal thirst. I remembered the summer of '98 when I was locked in a trunk for 2 days during a botched kidnapping, licking condensation off the metal just to stay sane. That kind of need doesn't care about which family you swore an oath to. The kid tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. Water. I lowered the gun. The capo would call me a liability. My own brother would say I had gone soft. Maybe they were right. But I grabbed a tin cup, filled it from the tap, and knelt beside the enemy. I held the rim to his lips and watched him drink like a man pulled from a burning building. I didn't know it then, but that cup of water was about to cost me everything I had built. The kid drank 3 cups before his hands stopped shaking. As the color returned to his face, I saw something that made my stomach turn over. The wound in his side wasn't from a drive-by or a long-range hit. It was a contact shot. Powder burns on the silk shirt. Someone had put a gun against his ribs and pulled the trigger, someone he let get close. That meant the shooter was still out there. And judging by the fresh blood, they were close. The kid looked at me, saw the realization in my eyes, and raised a trembling hand. He made a cutting motion across his throat and pointed toward the front gate. Danger. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to drag him to the compactor and erase the evidence. But moving him would kill him, and leaving him there was a death sentence for us both. Then I heard it. The sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel. Black SUVs rolling into the yard, fast. The kid heard it too. He tried to push himself behind the sink, smearing fresh blood on the concrete. I grabbed a rag and wiped the floor, but there wasn't enough time. The doors of the SUVs slammed shut. Heavy footsteps echoed off the metal containers. I looked down at the rival soldier. He wasn't looking at me with hate anymore. He was looking at me with gratitude. I made my choice. I couldn't carry him, but I could hide him. I shoved him into the hollowed-out chassis of an old sedan and threw a tarp over the gap. As I stood up, wiping my hands on my overalls, the footsteps stopped. I turned around. Standing 10 feet away was the enforcer. He was the most feared hitman in our own organization, a man who didn't just kill people, he erased them, and he wasn't alone. 5 heavy hitters stood behind him, hands in their jackets. The enforcer looked at me with dead, shark eyes. He sniffed the air. "Afternoon," he said. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. "We're tracking a rat. A wounded rat. The trail ends here." I felt the sweat bead on my forehead. "I haven't seen anyone," I said. "Just been working the crusher all day." The enforcer didn't blink. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning the yard until they landed on the utility sink. On the single missed drop of red near my boot. "Is that so?" he asked. "Because that looks like fresh blood to me. And unless you've been bleeding your own radiator, I'd say we have a problem." The enforcer took another step, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the oil-stained concrete. He stopped inches from my face, close enough that I could smell the stale tobacco and expensive cologne clinging to his suit. He didn't need to shout. When a man has killed as many people as he has, a whisper is louder than a scream. "You know the rules," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Harboring an enemy of the family is treason, and treason is a capital offense. We don't just kill you. We kill anyone who ever knew your name." I felt every muscle in my body lock up. My hand twitched toward the .38 in my waistband, but I knew I'd never clear the holster before his crew turned me into a sieve. I was calculating the odds of taking at least one of them with me when a voice cut through the silence like a razor blade. It didn't come from me. It came from the hollowed-out sedan behind me. "Tell him," the voice said. It wasn't the weak rasp of a dying boy anymore. It carried the kind of authority you only hear in boardrooms and backrooms. "Tell him why you're really here, Enforcer." The Enforcer froze. His eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, the mask slipping. The men behind him shifted, hands tightening on their weapons. The tarp over the sedan shifted, and the wounded kid pulled himself up. He looked like death warmed over, blood soaking his silk shirt, but he stood with his spine straight. He looked the Enforcer dead in the eye and spoke again. "You didn't come here to kill a soldier. You came here to bury a secret." The Enforcer's face turned the color of ash. He looked at his men, then back at the kid. I realized then that I had miscalculated everything. This wasn't just some foot soldier. The way he held himself, the arrogance, the specific dialect of the old country he slipped into. This was the heir, the son of the Southern Dawn, the kid who was supposed to be negotiating the ceasefire between our families. "You're supposed to be dead," the Enforcer hissed, his hand hovering near his lapel. "And you're supposed to be following orders," the heir shot back. "The meeting with the mediator wasn't a drive-by. It was an execution. Your men hit the convoy. Your men put a bullet in the mediator's head to make it look like my father broke the truce. The accusation hit the air like a bomb." The 5 men behind the Enforcer exchanged nervous glances. They were muscle, paid to hurt people, not to think, but even they knew that killing a mediator, a neutral party appointed by the Commission, was a death sentence for everyone involved. If the Enforcer had gone rogue to start a war, they were all walking dead men. "He's lying," the Enforcer barked, but the sweat on his upper lip gave him away. "He's the enemy. He killed the mediator to take the territory for himself. Put him down. Now." Nobody moved. The heir reached into his pocket with a trembling, blood-slicked hand. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a digital recorder, the kind the mediator used to document negotiations. "The mediator knew you were coming," the heir said. "He hit record before your team kicked in the door. It's all here. The offer from the cartel to buy you out. The price you put on the peace treaty." "Give me that," the Enforcer snarled, stepping forward. The heir didn't flinch. "If I die, this recording goes automatically to the cloud. And 5 minutes later, it lands in my father's inbox. And your boss's inbox." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a car. I saw the gears turning in the heads of the Enforcer's crew. They were looking at their leader not with fear but with suspicion. One of them, a young hitter with a scar over his eye, took a half step back. "Boss," the hitter said quietly, "if he's telling the truth, if we hit a mediator—" "Shut your mouth," the Enforcer snapped, but the control was gone. He looked like a cornered rat, vicious and desperate. He knew the narrative was slipping away. He knew that in our world, the truth doesn't matter as much as who survives to tell it. But he also knew that if that recording existed, he was already a ghost. I saw his hand move. Not for the recorder, but for his peace. He wasn't going to negotiate, he was going to clean house. He drew fast, the motion of a man who has decided that everyone in the room needs to die. But he wasn't the only one watching. The young hitter who had spoken up stepped into the line of fire, his own gun raising. "Don't do it!" the hitter yelled. The Enforcer didn't hesitate. He turned his weapon on his own man. The scrapyard erupted into chaos. The muzzle flash lit up the scrapyard like a lightning strike. But the bullet didn't find the air. It tore through the shoulder of the young hitter who had dared to speak up. The kid spun and hit the gravel screaming, clutching his shattered clavicle. The Enforcer swung his weapon back toward the air, his eyes wide with the frantic, cornered madness of a man watching his empire crumble. But he hesitated. He hesitated because the heir wasn't cowering. The boy was leaning against the rusted sedan, blood soaking his silk shirt, humming. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was a low, discordant melody, a Sicilian funeral dirge that hitmen used to whistle before a hit. It was a countdown. The Enforcer's remaining men glanced around nervously, their weapons dipping. The sound was unnerving, echoing off the stacks of crushed metal. "Shut him up!" the Enforcer roared, racking the slide of his pistol. "You can't stop what's coming," the heir said, his voice cutting through the humid air. "Listen." Then I felt it. A vibration in the soles of my work boots. It wasn't the rhythmic thud of a train, it was the deep, guttural growl of high-performance engines. Many of them. The corrugated metal gates of my yard didn't open. They exploded inward. A reinforced matte black SUV rammed through the chain-link fence, sending metal flying like shrapnel. Then a second, then a third. They fanned out in a tactical phalanx, blinding LED floodlights cutting through the gloom, turning the scrapyard into a stage. Doors flew open in unison. This wasn't a street gang. This was a paramilitary strike team. 24 men in tactical vests poured out, MP5s raised, moving with the synchronized precision of a liquidation squad. They wore the crimson armbands of the Southern Syndicate. The enforcer stood frozen, a king who had just realized his castle was built on a sinkhole. He was outgunned 10-1. From the lead vehicle, an older man stepped out. He didn't wear armor. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my entire operation. The Southern Dawn. He walked into the kill zone with the terrifying calm of a man who has ordered deaths between courses at dinner. He looked at his bleeding son, then turned his gaze to the enforcer. "Drop them," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. The enforcer's crew didn't need to be told twice. The metallic clatter of pistols hitting the concrete echoed through the yard. They backed away, hands raised, leaving their boss isolated in the center of the spotlight. The Don stopped 5 paces away. He held up a thick manila envelope. "We have the transcripts," he said, his voice smooth and cold as ice. "The encrypted chats with the cartel, the offshore accounts in the Caymans. You weren't protecting the commission, enforcer. You were selling us out to the highest bidder to start a war you thought you could profit from." The enforcer looked at his men, but there was no loyalty left. The evidence was physical, irrefutable. He had broken the oldest law of the underworld. He was a rat in a wolf's coat. I saw the shift in his eyes. The logic died, replaced by pure animal spite. If he was going down, he was taking the prize with him. He snapped his wrist, bringing the gun up toward the Don's chest. The heir lunged, trying to shield his father, but he was too weak, too slow. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the odds. I just moved. I slammed my shoulder into the enforcer's kidneys, tackling him into the hard-packed oil and gravel. The gun went off, a deafening boom right next to my ear, but the shot went wild, tearing harmlessly into the night sky. We hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and fury. I felt the bone in his wrist snap as I wrenched the pistol free, but I didn't stop. I drove my fist into his jaw, once, twice, unloading 20 years of repressed rage into the man who represented everything wrong with this life. By the time the Southern soldiers pulled me off, the enforcer wasn't moving. I stood up, chest heaving, wiping blood that wasn't mine off my face. The yard was silent again, save for the idling rumble of the SUVs. The Don walked over to me. He didn't look at his fallen enemy. He looked at me, the scrap dealer, the nobody. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "My son tells me you gave him water," the Don said. "He tells me you stood between him and the grave when you owed him nothing." "I just did what had to be done," I managed to say, my voice raspy. The Don nodded. "In our world, loyalty is a currency rarer than diamonds. Today you are a wealthy man." They cleaned up the mess with terrifying efficiency. The enforcer and his accomplice were zip-tied and thrown into the trunks of the SUVs. Live cargo for a very short, very final trip to the Pine Barrens. The heir, patched up by a field medic, gripped my hand before he got into the car. "You didn't just save a life today," he told me, his grip surprisingly strong. "You stopped a war." Then they were gone, leaving only the broken gate and the silence. But on the hood of a crushed sedan, they left a briefcase. Inside was enough cash to buy a new life. And tucked into the lining was a burner phone with a single number saved in the contacts. A direct line. I was no longer just a mechanic in the gray zone. I was a friend of the family. And in this city, that's the only insurance that keeps you breathing. The dust from the scuffle settled on my tongue, tasting of copper and diesel fumes. 2 of the Southern soldiers hauled the enforcer off the ground. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He knew the rules better than anyone. When you take a shot at the crown and miss, you don't get a sit-down. You get a one-way trip to the Pine Barrens in a trunk. They zip-tied his wrists with a plastic rasp that sounded louder than the gunshot in the sudden silence. The Don walked toward me. He moved with the slow, terrifying gravity of a man who owns the pavement he walks on. He stopped, looking down at his bleeding son, then at me. The adrenaline was draining out of my system, leaving just the cold, violent shake of a man who realizes he is standing alone in a room full of apex predators. The Don didn't smile. Men like him don't smile. He reached out, his manicured hands contrasting with the grease and blood on my coveralls, and gripped my shoulders. It wasn't a pat. It was a claim. "My son tells me you broke the code to save him," the Don said, his voice quiet, carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "He says you offered hospitality when the law of the street demanded a bullet." "I just gave him a drink," I managed to say, my throat dry. "He was thirsty. And that is how empires are built or destroyed," the Don replied, "on small choices." He signaled to one of his lieutenants. The man stepped forward holding a small velvet box. The Don opened it. Inside wasn't cash. It was a platinum signet ring, heavy and scarred, bearing the crest of the Southern Syndicate. "This belonged to my consigliere," the Don said, his eyes locking onto mine. "He carried it for 40 years. It has never left the inner circle. It has never been touched by anyone who wasn't blood." He pressed the cold metal into my grease-stained palm. It felt heavier than lead. It felt like a shackle. "You are no longer a civilian," the Don pronounced. "You are amico nostra, a friend of ours. Your yard is now sanctuary. Your debts are cleared. Your enemies are our enemies." The soldiers lowered their weapons in a ripple of movement, a silent salute to the new hierarchy. I watched as they loaded the enforcer into the trunk of the lead SUV. The traitor looked at me one last time, his eyes dead and empty, before the lid slammed shut. The sound was final. They left as quickly as they came, a convoy of red taillights disappearing into the city smog. They left me with a briefcase of money I hadn't counted and a ring I was terrified to wear. The war ended that night. The peace treaty was signed in blood and ink, and the territory lines were redrawn. The corrupt elements of the organization were purged with surgical precision. And me? I'm still here. I still run the crusher. I still melt down engines. But now, when black SUVs roll up to my gate at 3 in the morning, I don't reach for my .38. I open the gate. I offer them water. I bury what needs to be buried. I saved a life that day, and in return, I lost the only thing that really matters in this city. My anonymity. I am a rich man now, protected by the most dangerous people on earth. But every time I look at that platinum ring sitting on my nightstand, I remember the truth. I didn't just save a boy. I signed a contract in blood. And in this life, there is no retirement plan.